So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to my webinar on positivity in a professional environment. And a huge thanks to ACCES Employment for having me back again this year. I think this time around last year, I had the opportunity to host a webinar with ACCES Employment. Now, just before I get started, I'm going to walk us through what our next hour is going to look like. Keisha, if you could, the next slide, please. So we're going to start off with a quick introduction. We're going to look into positivity, a textbook definition, and additional information around that. We will then look at communication and resiliency. Thereafter, we will talk about building a personal brand image. And if you do have any questions, my ask is if you could hold off to it towards the end of the presentation, as there's going to be a special Q&A session, and then we'll wrap it up with our close. To the next slide. So just a quick introduction about myself. My name is Radhika. As I mentioned earlier, I am a pooled fund analyst at CIBC Mellon. A couple of personal interests include I enjoy reading books. I've set a goal to read 30 books this year, and I'm in about 10 at the moment. So I am really hoping I hit that goal. In addition to that, I am a dance fitness instructor. Pre-COVID, I had the privilege to train individuals at the YMCA. And last but not least, I love traveling. Fortunately, I just came back from a trip from Mexico. So that kind of in a nutshell is a little bit about myself. Moving on. So now I'd like to start off and kind of tell you what the benefits are about being positive. So first and foremost, it enhances the quality of our relationships with our peers and coworkers. In addition to that, it bridges the gap between our goals and where we are today. It also improves your mental and physical health. And last but not least, it makes you more resilient in states of stress. The way positivity sort of works is, the analogy that I like to give it is, think about a glass. When it's full, it overflows to everything around. Likewise, when you fill yourself up with positivity, it'll flood to people in your reach. Moving on. Understanding the cognitive cycle is extremely important and plays a really important role in positivity. So everything starts off with our thoughts. Based on multiple thoughts, we articulate beliefs. Based on multiple beliefs, we have feelings, and based on our feelings, actions are performed, and thereafter we see results. Now, if you're not happy with the results you're seeing, we've got to tackle the source itself, which is our thoughts, and that's exactly what we'll be looking into today. Moving on. So communication and resiliency is what we're going to be looking at in the first section of our presentation today. So communication is not about speaking what we think. I'm going to say that again. Communication is not about speaking what we think. Communication is all about ensuring others understand what we mean, said Simon Sinek. When we're communicating with other individuals, we want to ensure that the message that we are intending to communicate is what is being heard. And there's a couple ways that we could ensure our communication is thorough and clear. So first and foremost, it's your physiology. Physiology includes your posture, your stance, your gestures. A couple great examples of how physiology has played a really important role in business environment will be listed as follows. So a quick close. You'll notice when negotiators are performing a quick close, you'll notice that both individuals are standing. Another great example of how physiology plays a huge role is in the schooling environment. You'll notice that when teachers are teaching, they'll always be standing while students will always be sitting. And this indicates a transfer of knowledge. And last but not least, when there's a roundtable conference happening where everybody's discussing something and it's obviously a lot more longer in length, you'll notice that everyone's sitting and their physical state is in a position of sitting. You'll also notice that when a person is depressed, their physiology changes. Their shoulders are dropped down and their chin is also dropped down. Whereas somebody who's in a state of happiness, their chin is lifted up, while their shoulders are rolled back. Another way to communicate, place where communication plays a huge role is the choice of words we use. So just to really help you understand and grasp the importance of the choice of words, I'm going to run us through a really quick example. Just for a quick second, I'd like everyone to close their eyes. Now, I'd like you to do exactly as I say. Do not think about purple paper. Now, open your eyes, and in the chat box, if you would, tell me what the first thing you thought about was. Just real quick, drop it in the chat box. Blue paper, purple paper, purple paper, purple paper. So where I'm getting at with this is our brain actually filters out the knots. When you say, I do not want to be late, you will actually be late because your brain has filtered out the knot. And in this, we're going to be looking a little bit more in depth in the slides to come. But before I do move on to the next slide, I'd like to talk about another really important piece when it comes to communicating. It's extremely important to be clear and direct when we are communicating. And a great example, or actually a story I'd like to share, where I attended a seminar not too long ago, and the coach that was running the seminar, he went to one of the individuals a couple rows down from me, and he asked him. He says, "Tell me something you want, just anything." And the gentleman that's being asked the question, he says, "I want more money." And sure enough, my coach reaches into his pocket, pulls out 25 cents, and drops it on his desk. Now, I'm pretty sure the gentleman that said he wanted more money, he didn't want just 25 cents. And this just goes to show, when we are asking for something, when we are setting goals, when we are communicating, if we are not clear on what we want, we will get what's there. And there's a great abbreviation or a great tool that's been used across several industries, and it's called SMART. SMART's abbreviated for being specific, ensuring things are measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. When we are communicating, it's extremely important to utilize all 5 of these components. Another great piece to be mindful of is to be direct when we are communicating. Keisha, I think we lost the slide there.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. One second.
No worries. There we go.
Can you see it?
Yep. Awesome. Thanks,
okay,
Keisha.
Perfect. Sorry about that.
No worries. So going back to what I was saying is that it's also really important to be direct when we're communicating. Addressing individuals with their names actually creates a rapport, as there is a personal identification attached to it. Think about it this way. If you are in a herd of people and you want to ensure that your message is being communicated, you will address that individual with their name. Likewise, it's important to address individuals with their names if you want to ensure that you are being heard. Last but not least is learning modalities. So modality is just a fancier word for our 5 senses. Each individual utilizes all 5 senses, and there are, in fact, 3 dominant ones. One is your seeing, your hearing, and your feeling. And we're going to be looking a little bit more into depth in this particular topic in slides to come. So I'd like to move on now to the next slide, where we'll be looking at our choice of words. So as I mentioned earlier, choice of words is extremely important because a switch in your language is a switch in your life. A couple great switch words have been showcased on the slide in front of you. But instead of saying no problem, you should say you're welcome. The reason is because your brain filters out the no, and it's just problem. Another great example is I am sick. Instead, you should say I don't feel well. Again, your brain filters out the don't, and it's only I feel well. And last but not least, instead of saying I forgot, you can say I didn't remember. Same sort of concept, because your brain filters out the didn't, and it will be I remember. And here's a really interesting one. What does it mean to mourn? To mourn, it means to grieve upon, to dwell upon. Yet every day when we wake up, we wish people good morning. You'll notice in some countries around the world, instead of saying good morning, they'll say something like great risings or great awakenings. And this just goes to show that the switch in your language could potentially switch your entire life. Moving on. So as I mentioned earlier, learning modalities, and modalities is just a fancier word for our 5 senses. And I also mentioned that we have 3 dominant senses. Out of the 3, individuals utilize all, of course, but they also have a dominant within. So an individual who's has a visual dominant modality, their speech will be much faster. They will use visual metaphors such as, you see where I'm coming from. Eyes tend to squint during a story, and that's because they're trying to visualize the story at the back of their head. Now, individuals with auditory dominant modality, their speech will be a little bit more slower, and they'll be selective with their choice of words. They'll use auditory metaphors such as, you hear me, or that sounds right. Eyes will be moving towards their bottom right, and you'll also notice that the ear kind of comes out forward. And last but not least, kinesthetic dominant modalities, their speech will be the slowest of all. And that's because they're trying to translate everything that they are feeling. In addition to that, they will use kinesthetic metaphors such as, I will touch base with you later. And their eyes will move towards their heart, again, because they're trying to communicate everything that they are feeling. I'd like to share a quick story, and it's about a couple. And you might be thinking, what does a couple have to do with positivity in a professional environment? Now, if you understand that, if you could grasp the concept of this, you can apply it in any relationship. It could be a relationship in your personal life. It could be your relationship with your clients. It could be your relationship with your peers, your coworkers, your friends, and so forth. So there was once this couple, and they started off with an amazing relationship. Everything was perfect. Initially, when a couple's in a startup phase, they're in what's called the honeymoon phase. And in honeymoon phase, all 5 senses are being used. Now, what happens over time is that people become comfortable with each other, and they drop all 5 senses, and they begin to use their dominant. So this couple, as I mentioned, they had an amazing relationship, and everything was perfect. A few years passed, and this conversation, consecutively kept repeating, where the husband would come home and tell his wife, I love you. And she says, what do you mean you love me, right? And she's like, you're just all talk. And he said, don't you hear me? I said, I love you. Now, can anyone tell me what the husband's dominant modality is? Rhetorical question, but we could tell right off the bat it's the auditory, as he uses metaphors such as, don't you hear me? I am telling you that I love you. Now the wife responds, and she says, well, you don't buy me gifts anymore. You don't take me places anymore. And this is a really important to grasp onto. An individual whose dominant modality is a visual, they aren't necessarily materialistic. But what it is that they need something visual to feel gratification in a relationship. So she needs to be taken to places. She needs to be bought gifts because she sees she visually sees something that will give her gratification. And in order for a relationship to flourish, she needs to be able to see something. Now, once I realized that this wasn't an issue between the relationship, it was just understanding each other's modalities, the relationship did heal, and the rapport was recreated. And this is, as I mentioned, this is something that we can apply in all of our relationships. Like I said, it could be applied with our peers, our coworkers. It could also be applied with our clients. And it's just really understanding their dominant modality and being able to match and mirror. Now I'd like to move on to our next piece, which is building resiliency. So there's a couple ways that we could become resilient. Some of them include practicing gratitude, responding versus reacting, and understanding the grid. So moving on to the next slide, I'm going to start off with looking at the topic of responding versus reacting. So this chart is a great depiction of how responding versus reacting looks. So let's just say somebody approaches me and I catch them on an off day or an off moment, and their behavior towards me is not so great. Now that has an impact on me, and that impact I decide to carry forward and it influences my behavior towards another individual. That thereafter has an impact on someone else. And you can see right off the bat that this is just nothing but a vicious circle. And what we really want to do is lift ourselves from this circle. So in the next slide, we're going to look at how we can respond versus react. So when a stimuli hits, so when a circumstance comes our way, we actually have a split second to decide whether we are going to react or whether we are going to respond. Now, if we are reacting, it'll be very impulsive. It's a flight or fight kind of moment, and you often regret what you've said. When you are responding, it's well thought of, it's intentional, and it's non-threatening and calm. So next time you come across a situation, really take a step back, take that split second to decide whether you want to react and regret the consequences later, or respond. Moving on to the next slide. Understanding gratitude. So there's a couple extremely important things that we need to understand about gratitude. So first and foremost, it increases our work performance and satisfaction. It results in a balanced lifestyle. Historically, we've been told that we should allocate 25% of our energy in our work life, 25% of our energy in our relationships, 25% of our energy in our health and wellness, and 25% in our finances. Although over years, research was done, and they said that that's an inaccurate depiction of how a balanced lifestyle looks. We should be allocating 100% of our energy in our work. We should be allocating 100% of our energy in our relationships. We should be allocating 100% of our energy in our health and wellness and so forth. In addition to that, gratitude also improves our relationship. Studies have actually proven for every one complaint, you need 10 grateful comments to offset that one complaint to recreate some sort of normalness. So think about all the times we've thought, said, or performed an action that was ungrateful. Did we have those 10 offsetting entries of gratitude? And last but not least, gratitude also creates a charismatic and compelling personality. Moving on. So what are a couple ways that we can be grateful? First and foremost, we can journal. We can utilize the thank you mantra, and we can do a self-gratitude test. So let's start off by looking at journaling. Journaling has been proven to use an X number of kinetics, and when we are writing something down, those X number of kinetics are used. And therefore, it drives energy to our unconscious mind. Think about it. When we're going to a gym and we listen to a song, we decide to listen to the exact same song throughout the entire workout session. While we're working out, an X number of kinetics are used. And when we return home, throughout the night, that song just consistently keeps playing in at the back of your head. Likewise, when we are writing something down, an X number of kinetics, there's motion involved when we are writing. And more motion is involved when we are writing something down versus us just typing something up. And therefore, when those kinetics are moving, even when we're sleeping, unconscious mind is consistently going to repeat the same thing. And there's an old adage that's been used for years, and it says, "Can I have this in writing?" When you write something down, you've given it certainty. So let's just say, for instance, your relationship with somebody on a specific day wasn't going that well. And you write 10 things that you are grateful about them. And it could be realistically anything. What you've done is you've given certainty that your relationship is nothing but gratitude with that individual, and you'll see a change, a massive change overnight with your relationship with that individual. The other way you can practice gratitude is the thank you mantra. Now, what differentiates a mantra from a set of words? It's repetition. When you repeat something enough times, again, you're doing the same thing, it seeps into your unconscious mind. And not only just that, when you repeat something enough times, you've also learned the energy behind the words. And last but not least, it's a self-gratitude test. Ask yourself the following questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the greatest, 10 being the worst, do you appreciate and talk to others about every paycheck you've received, or do you only just worry when there's cutbacks? Do you appreciate and talk to others about when your relationships are flourishing, or only when they're going downhill? And last but not least, do you appreciate and talk to others about when your health is doing great, or only when it's deteriorating? I'm going to give you guys a couple of seconds to kind of think about that one. Alrighty, we can move on to the next slide. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I said that I did this webinar last year. And this particular piece was not included because this was a recent finding for myself. Understanding the grid. Understanding the grid is to understand where other individuals are coming from. So the point of intersection determines your encounter with an individual. I'm going to say that again. The point of intersection determines your encounter with an individual. Multiple encounters at the same intersection leaves an impression. Well, let's say, for instance, you consistently catch somebody at the worst time of the day. And every single day, you just so happen to catch them at that same time of the day. Now, your impression towards that person is that this person's not such a great person. Now, another individual, let's say one of your peers, interacts with the same person at a different point, at a different point on the grid, where they're feeling amazing. And they consistently interact with that person at that same period, at the same moment. Their impression on that person will be completely different. Now, where I'm getting at with this is it's really important to understand where the other person is, right? That other person may have lost a loved one. That other person may be going through a financial crisis. And when we understand each other a little bit more, we become more resilient, and your relationship defaults to becoming better. So this does wrap up the chapter of resiliency, and I'd like to now move on to our last chapter, which is building a personal brand image. So there are a couple of channels of how we could build a personal brand image, which will be shown in the slide that follows. So as I mentioned, there's a couple of channels. One of them include leadership, another one's acts of giving, and last but not least, it's creating a community of impact. So let's start off by looking at leadership. So my mentor once told me that an organization that he once worked at, every employee was required to take a leadership training course. And what that told me is that your manager is not necessarily a leader, and you don't have to be a leader to, I mean, you don't have to be a manager to be a leader. And that doesn't mean that, if you are a manager, you're not a leader. Where I'm getting at is that everyone can be a leader. And a couple great examples of how leaders stand out is leaders, first and foremost, breed more leaders. They serve others before themselves, and they serve needs, to be particular. If we look at the colorful chart on the side, this is Maslow's hierarchy, and he outlines several human needs. And if you, as an individual, as a leader, are able to serve these individual needs before you serve yourselves, you've depicted one massive attribute of true leadership. In addition to that, language of inclusiveness is used. So instead of saying instead of saying I, they say we. Instead of saying go, they say let's go. In addition to that, leaders lead by example, not just by word. And last but not least, they earn respect rather than demanding respect. Moving on to the next slide. The act of giving. So selfless giving is the art of living, Frederick once said. Now, when we give, it's easy to kind of have strings attached. We expect that this person, I've done this for this person, therefore they should do this for me. However, when we give selflessly, it'll change the entire scope of what you experience. When I was younger, I always thought that money was the only way we can give. As I grew older, I understood that that wasn't something that's true. I realized we can also give people our time, and we can give our well thoughts. I think well thoughts is by far the most important. And the reason why I say that is because nobody's watching you, right? Nobody's there to see what you are thinking about or what you are thinking for another person, and if you are truly wishing them well. So to build a personal brand image, it's really important to give, and give without strings being attached or having a personal agenda involved. And last but not least, moving on to the last slide, is creating a community of impact. If you want to build a personal brand image, you must create a community of impact. And when you do that, you create lasting impressions. It results in a ripple effect. And this goes back to the analogy that I used about the water bottle overflowing. And you're operating from a stance of abundance. So before we, disperse back off into our daily routine, I'd like to set us all off on what I call an impact challenge. Outside, and once this presentation is completed, I'd like all of us to complete a random act of kindness to someone in our reach, whether it be somebody at work, whether it be it's somebody with at home, or just somebody in your reach, and share this story with me. I'll be sharing my LinkedIn and email address. Please do tell me how you complete this random act of kindness. I too will be doing it, and I'll be sharing it on my LinkedIn shortly after. So moving on to our last slide. I promised that I'd be sharing a couple of great reads. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about modalities, reading Tony Robbins' book called Unlimited Power, he dives a lot more in depth. I literally just scratched the surface right now about modalities. He also touches base on something super interesting called NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. If you are looking to shift your words, another great read is Every Word Has Power by Yvonne Oswald. My favorite book is The Magic by Rhonda Byrne. This book is a 28-day course practice of gratitude. And to this day, I've been reading this book ever since I was in grade 8, but to this day, I read this book, and I twice a year recomplete that 28-day practice of gratitude. And it really goes deep into even our unconscious state, and it's a phenomenal read. And last but not least, leadership is a topic of its own, and if you are interested in it, there's a book by Simon Sinek. It's called Leaders Eat Last. Now I'd like to move on to the last slide and open up the floor for questions if we have any.
All right, so let's take a look. Does anybody have any questions for Radhika? So Radhika, HP wants to know, how can an individual change from being reactive to responsive?
So as I mentioned in the presentation, we have a split second when a stimuli hits our way. So when a circumstance comes our way, we have a split second to decide whether we are going to react versus respond. And the best way I felt that's worked for me is taking that split second to analyze the consequence. If I impulsively react and give an impulsive, just make an impulsive decision, it'll weigh down, and I'll see a lot more regret. And if we take that split second to really think out what it is that the individual is looking for and understanding where they're coming from, it'll help you and it'll assist you in being more responsive. I hope I answered your question, if that's what you were looking for.
Thank you, Radhika. Anybody else have any questions for Radhika? HP says, thank you. It was a great presentation.
So
anybody else have any questions? Okay, it looks like you were right on target because you've answered anything that anyone could have asked.
All right, just before we do call it a day, I'd like to move to the very last slide. Keisha. Alrighty, yep. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you for everyone who's joined today's webinar. I hope you enjoyed the webinar as much as I enjoyed putting it together for you guys. Also, a huge thank you to CIBC Mellon for working with ACCES to have volunteering events as such. In addition to that, I'd also like to thank my team for supporting me while I'm here. We've been super short-staffed, so thank you, team, for coverage and support. And last but not least, I'd like to thank Keisha and all of ACCES Employment for organizing this webinar. I think these initiatives are amazing, and it's a great way to reach multiple people.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Radhika. We really appreciated having you here. Just one thing. So Carol, there will be, this session is recorded. So once we do post it on our YouTube channel, you can access it by searching ACCES Employment and going on to our playlist for Job Search Webinars 2022.
Okay, awesome. All right.
All
and
right.
I shared my email address on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to me if you guys do have questions later on. It's truly been a privilege to host this webinar today.